Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Line Change, the NHL betting podcast from the Action Network. My name is Michael Leboff, and joining me for our Western Conference playoff preview are Nick Martin and Tim Kalinowski. We've got 4 series. They're finally set. We had to wait until deep into the night Thursday for this to all get settled, but we're here. It's Colorado versus Winnipeg, Nashville and Vancouver, Vegas and Dallas, and Los Angeles Kings against the Edmonton Oilers for the third year running. But we will start with at the top. We'll start with a couple series that start on Sunday. We'll start with Winnipeg and Colorado. This line's been out there for a while. These two have known they're going to be playing for a while. The Avalanche are minus 135 on the series price. Jets plus 115. They are the team with home ice advantage. We've seen a lot of different kind of versions of the Colorado Avalanche this season, so I think a lot of this is trying to figure out which one shows up for the playoffs, or if both of them do, for how long, etc. We kind of have an idea of how the Jets are going to want to play this one. The one bet I think I have a little bit of interest in here is Colorado to win from behind, or to bet Colorado if they go behind in the series. I do think that they make more sense as a team playing catch up than the Jets do. Um, Outside of that, we'll go into our Conn Smythe portfolios at the end of the show, but I'm sure you can surmise which Winnipeg Jet we're going to be stumping for at the end. But outside of that, Nick, I've got nothing here. I think I'll probably be betting the Jets on a game-to-game basis here, at least for game one, but nothing right off the jump, this is how you want to start the show.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. So I dug out some interesting numbers based off what I've been seeing. I kind of lean towards the Avs finding a way, but I don't have enough conviction because of where their goaltending's been, the way the Jets just demolished them, which I do think people always overrate. If you look at a huge sample of like the season series stuff, it doesn't tend to lend itself that much. And you always have to consider that the better team is just winning more of those games anyways when you think about that data, right? So but the one thing that I pulled that I think is interesting because I've seen so many fans, so many analysts saying how much of an advantage home ice is going to be in this series. I think that remains to be seen a little bit. You don't have to look any further than the Av series last year. And I know Winnipeg has a more legitimate home ice advantage, and the Avs, I think, had some stuff going on last year. But uh, so last year, road teams were 5-2 in the Av series. So that'd kind of be the counterpoint to this. But we're seeing every single analyst talk about how much home ice is going to matter in this game, in this series. And if you want to bet into that, which I'm not necessarily endorsing, but it's been really popular, it is a market that's out there. You can bet under 2.5 road wins at even money. So if you believe in that at all, that's a pretty serious number because, if like, that would just be home teams going 4-2 if the series only went 6 games. So it's not like, and then you could do under 1.5 at plus 400. So that's kind of the one like somewhat interesting note out there because it feels like everyone's tapping into that narrative. So I'm not necessarily on it. And I know that's not like overly interesting, but I also do feel like for how much this is out there and everyone's saying it, if you want to get in on that is kind of like an interesting number because I actually do feel like it's almost better than I expected. But I also think it's more possible that the home ice isn't going to play as much of a role as people think once you get into the games. I'm thinking they'll look more or less the same, wherever the game's being played.
Yeah, and I think too with the Jets being in the Central Division, like they're used to, I guess, the altitude or going back and forth from there. And we all remember my bet a couple weeks ago when I tried to catch Winnipeg on the end of a road trip in altitude, and that didn't work out. The game was like 7-0 or whatever before you could blink. In terms of this series, excuse the cross sport analogy for the millionth time, but it feels like a March Madness game where it's like a clash of styles, and one team that kind of wants to play slow and use up the entire shot clock, other team wants to run. For Colorado's perspective, it's going to be about, can they capitalize when they're getting their runs and they're tilting the ice, and can Winnipeg kind of just hold down the fort and weather that type of storm. And I think that's something where I'm not trying to take a cop out and not taking a side before we go here, because I just want to see how it plays out. And I think that you can kind of get a vibe of that. Colorado's one of those teams, and then on the other side of it, their goaltending is so many question marks.
Yeah.
I don't know how you could feel confident in that at all. It's such a wide gap, I think, and And so while I guess I have a future on the Avs, so I'm not gonna really be betting into the series price, but just two props here. Gabe Vilardi, most goals, 18-1 in the series. I think he's a guy that is possibly getting overlooked in the market just because of his games played this year. He had 22 goals through 47 games played, which is pretty on par for the top guys on his team. And then Makar, most points in the series at 9-1. If you remember the 22 run, Makar led the team in points. And last year, when Colorado's early exit, Rantanen led their team in points. So it hasn't been McKinnon. If you look at the two examples I gave you. So I'm looking to go off the board there, Makar.
Yep. Game one
Yeah,
odds are basically a pick 'em. I playing into that goaltender narrative, Tim, I think that's why I like game one going with Winnipeg, because I do think if we see Georgiev or Justice Anunin like struggle, Winnipeg at home is going to start taking money in like game two and beyond. So I like, it's not like you're being asked to pay a crazy price on the Jets. So I think that Winnipeg at -115 or better is fine for game one. Anything else here, Nick?
No, yeah, I think it's kind of a lame take. I think it's we're going to hear from everyone, but it does really feel like it comes down to the goaltenders. Over the last month, Georgiev's been getting crushed. He's like sitting on 884 save percentage. I know he might not even be the starter, and then obviously what Hellebuck's done is really significant. I'm also a little tempted by the over in game one. I still feel like just the Avs getting shaky goaltending, but it's like 5.5 with this Avs team, the way they push for offense, even if it's Hellebuck in there, obviously. That's kind of the closest bet when I look at that. But yeah, that's really all I have. And the thing with the Avs, and you can always kind of see it, is I feel like they have so many of these like 7-0 blowouts, because when they get out of sync and when they push for offense and when they have these breakdowns, it's just not like a normal team. And it feels like maybe there'll be a game or two like that. So yeah, I'm excited to get into this one. I feel like we haven't seen the best of it from the Avs. So everyone's pointing to that 7-0 game and this and that. I don't think they're going to get like outplayed in the series at all. I think it's just such a question mark if they're going to get any goaltending.
I have one more question, Leboff. Sorry. Nick, I think you bring up a good point with, I think a lot of the narrative has been like, oh yeah, the Avs are limping in this goaltending thing. Like this was still a tremendous team during the regular season. Um, will the Jets likely be dogs in every game?
No, they'll be a slight favorite game one, I think, or I think when the Jets are at home, it'll be a pick 'em.
Okay. So what my point was just like, if it's Jets +115 right now in the series, like wouldn't you just rather be betting them almost every game instead if you like that? Like,
No, I would think it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Like if you think there's going to be a legit home ice advantage and the Jets are only a pick in game one and game two would probably be comparable, then I'd say that's kind of the opposite. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
But yeah, just because like chances are, and then when they head into Colorado, they're going to make +115. So, and I mean, obviously that is a little dependent on how the games go, I think. But
because I feel like if you just had them in every game and it's they win like the series 4-2 or something, like I'd rather be doing that than take the 115 right now, if that makes sense. I don't know. I feel like there could be value on them by game.
Yep.
yeah, and in general, like I kind of prefer the game by game betting. There's not a lot of series where I feel like I look at it and just think that like the series number is great, especially with like the favorites. It just feels like you like lock yourself in when like the playoffs are like so unpredictable and so volatile. It feels like you like kind of give yourself an avenue to like try to make adjustments and be right, compared to just being like, oh, this team will never beat that team, and then you're just like stuck with it.
And their goalie pulls a groin in game
Right,
one.
exactly.
Like,
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So that's Jets and Avs. Canucks and Preds is the other series that gets started on Sunday night. This is in Vancouver. First like legitimate home playoff game for Vancouver since 2015. So should be a pretty fun atmosphere over in British Columbia. The Canucks are -150 on the series price. Preds +130. The game one odds look very similar. Canucks -145 plus 125 on the Preds. Total 5.5 for that one. And I do think that we're going to start seeing a lot of people circling the Preds as their kind of live underdog for round one. I don't think that the price for me at least is good enough on Nashville. I think that this series is one I'd rather back some props, like exact score props, I think if you like Nashville, the series, I'd actually rather go with the extremes. Like I think that the Predators have a chance to pull this thing off quickly. Like they're good enough to do it. They got the goalie who can play with Demko. Maybe Demko, he hasn't played much because of the injury. Perhaps the moment's good enough, too big for the Canucks. Like I said, this is it. Like their first playoff, legitimate playoff series outside of the bubble since 2015. I can see this thing going off the rails quickly for the Canucks. So like Nashville will win 4-1 at like better than 8-1 is actually a little interesting. The other way, in a weird way, I think Vancouver's best chance to win. Like I can't see Vancouver doing that. I just don't see them being able to just like push the Preds out of this thing all that quickly, and that shows in the odds. Right, them to win in 7 is the most likely outcome by FanDuel's numbers. So you can take a look at something like that. But my favorite bet in this series is Gus Nyquist to lead it in goals. He's 15-1. Great season from him. He's got a great spot on that top line. I think this is a series where most series have one or two guys that you're going to have to beat out, whether it's like Austin Matthews, McKinnon, McDavid. I think this one is a little bit different at the very top of the series, at the very top of these boards. So this is the one where I would go. I would love to go a little deeper on the goal scorers, and that's how I landed on Gus Nyquist. Nick, I think he's been brilliant for them this season.
Yeah, I'm actually seeing it a little different. I was close. I looked at the price for this one to go over 5.5 games. I didn't think it was quite there, but I actually think this one's just going to be really tightly contested. I think both teams are going to kind of have their share of looks and wins. Like I think this one goes 6, and I'm a little surprised to see Van in 7 is the most likely scoreline. I would have thought Van in 6 was the most likely scoreline, and then Van in 7. But anyways, that's a bit of an aside. And I'm kind of with you on the Preds extremes. Like for me, I actually think the Canucks are pretty legit right now. I think more so than people are thinking. So if the Preds can knock them off, I'd rather target them like something crazy. They're still out there around 50-1 to win the cup. I don't hate that. Like I don't necessarily think they're going to win the cup, but I think if they win this series, they can obviously they've proven that they're going to be live versus anyone. I think they're a pretty damn good team. I believe in the Predators all year. So I don't think it's like a knock on the Canucks to say I'm not interested in touching their series line here. I just think this one is going to be tough. And that kind of goes into, I think, kind of an interesting point because we heard all the same stuff last year. And I saw Biz tweeted, Dallas doesn't win the cup if they play Vegas first round. They'll be gassed. They'll beat the shit out of each other. Would be shocked if either team gets the finals if they face off in round 1. I think that people always think about this point. We heard it last year about the East. But the only time it holds like weight is if you actually think there's going to be one team that's winning series in like sweeps, which is maybe like the Rangers, maybe whatever. But I don't think the West has many of those. I look at these West matchups. I think there's a good chance a lot of them, like I think all of them, I lean towards going 6 or 7. I know it always ends up like some of them don't, but I think that these are super competitive. I don't necessarily believe in that at all because I can't see which of these teams that I think is like overly likely to just blow through whoever. Which applies to this series because I think the Preds are pretty legit and are going to give them a good, honest scare.
Yeah, that's something I always bring up when we handicap tennis tournaments is like when you talk about the player that gets drawn into like the quarter of death. Like let's say it's Carlos Alcaraz, and you're like, God, he's got to go through Medvedev, he's got to go through Djokovic, etc. in his quarter. Like that makes me like him more because if he gets through that group, that means he's playing really well. Like and I know it's less likely. So I understand what you're saying. Like if the Predators can beat Vancouver.
Well, I'm just saying strictly like fatigue wise.
Yeah, I don't
like
think, but
saying like these teams are gonna beat the hell out of each other. All this series, everyone's gonna beat the hell out of each other.
Yeah,
I don't think
but it also means they're playing well, right? Like even if they win at 6 or 7, it means that they were able to win huge games. And so I never worry too much about that in the playoffs either. Tim, anything here, Preds and Canucks?
Yeah, I said a couple of weeks ago when we did the NHL collab that I would be betting Nashville in their first round series, no matter what the price was. I didn't think the price would be this low. I wanted, I guess, get your guys' opinion on what you think about in terms of like the playoff experience, in terms of guys like Nyquist, guys like O'Reilly, McDonough, how much that maybe plays into your handicap, because I feel like it's the numbers would probably say experience is like more of a coin flip type thing. There's enough examples that go one way as much as the other, but like you would think that Vancouver, with the volatility of goaltending in the West, was going to have a goalie advantage in any matchup they got, but not quite this one. So I feel like I'm looking at the series as a little bit of value on the Predators. I don't maybe want to lock it in ahead of time, as with the conversation we just had, but might be Preds game by game here. It's one of those things where it seems very square because everyone's been saying like, oh, Vancouver, they could be frauds. Someone could knock them off. Nashville's the perfect team. And now the actual prices come out and it's like, I don't know if I want to. Seems very into the narrative. I feel like Nashville more on a game by game basis could be what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I mean, the Canucks aren't that big of a favorite here. They played pretty legitimately good down the stretch. They obviously won the division, so it looks right. I think the experience thing, I mean, I'd love to pull up the takes when the Canucks knocked off the Blues. And I know it was in the bubble and I know things were different, but I guarantee...
Or the Rangers and Devils last year.
Yeah, like if you pulled up those takes, everyone who thought all that had significant meaning would have been 100% saying there's no way they knock off like the defending champ Blues and all that stuff. And I do think, like you, Tim, I mean, you look at the Kraken last year, it's, to me, is just, you don't know who's going to get in there and handle the big moments. Like it could be guys who've never done it before, and some of those guys might struggle, like, and not be able to bring it. And I think it makes sense. Like it comes down more to just, I think, the kind of character of each person and so on, than just being like, oh, this team doesn't really have that many guys who've done it. They're not gonna be able to figure it out. They don't know how to play still. I think seems a little dumb. So I don't know if I buy into that for the Canucks. I think they can. I'm not like counting on them letting down just on that. It feels like a little unfair. I think if they let down, it's just going to be because the Canucks or the Preds are a really good team with a great goalie, and they're going to make the games into, kind of a just closely contested battle, not because they necessarily were a fraud or like weren't ready for the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's like not a bad thing to have playoff experience, but it's just not something I'm gonna if the Canucks and Predators are playing and you say it's -110 on either side and in Game 7 in a vacuum, I'd just be like, I'm not betting one team because they have got more playoff experience. I think that's how I'd look at it. Okay, let's move to the Monday games. We'll start with the Oilers and Kings. Edmonton -190, Kings +160. These two teams obviously played 2 years running in the postseason, so you're going to hear a lot about that. This is the series. I think that Nick was talking about how you'd rather bet the game by game, and perhaps it holds true here, but I think I'm actually going to bet the Kings before this thing starts at +160 or better. The Oilers are the team with obviously the higher ceiling. They've got the superstars, the everything. Like this is a legitimate cup contender. Not disagreeing with that at all, but this Kings team is always going to be a tough out. The goaltending edge is now non-existent. Like if Los Angeles had drawn Dallas, like I know Ottinger's had the best season, but we're having a conversation about goalies on a deep one, right? But with question marks on both sides, I think it almost becomes a wash. And with the way that the Kings defend, I think you can even make an argument that their goaltenders will probably have a better chance to be the good story here than Skinner. But that said, I do think that the Oilers are the more likely winner. But I think at +160, like you got to be thinking about the Kings here, Nick.
Yeah, I like the Kings at +160 in Game 1 for sure. I think and you guys, like, people have listened to us all year. Like, we were endorsing the Oil before they turned it around, been pretty consistently high on them. And it's not like a slight to the Oil. I just think people are underrating the Kings to be +160 when we know this is going to be, I think, a little more closely contested than that. I think there's enough question marks. And the thing for me is that I think makes LA a little interesting and scary is, like, I saw people saying they're the worst roster in the playoffs. I disagree with that a lot. I think that yeah, they've played the worst hockey, but I think that's what's scary is around December, everyone thought this roster had no flaws and was just a complete wagon. And then they kind of fell off out of the blue. So they don't have the scoring upside of the Oilers, but I do think they have a lot more than people think. And I'm interested to see. It's a minor thing, but I do think part of the flaw recently has been the lineup is just idiotic. They have Byfield on the fourth line, they have Fiala on the third line. I think if they did flip this at the end of the game versus Chicago and just demolish them, which I don't even, but I just think that there's enough talent that given the right configuration, it's a scary unit. They can defend. I think the power play can be pretty reasonable at times. It's a pretty good makeup. So I look at this like with Arvidsson back in the mix. If Byfield's going to find his form, Fiala I think is a player that could go off. I always love his game. So I think people are really underrating the Kings. Yes, they kind of like limped for a pretty long period of time down the stretch, but I think there is a lot more talent than people seem to be crediting. So it's another series where I'm not like overly interested in laying the big number. And yeah, in game one, I think the Kings are going to be really live. Plus 158 is the current price. I think that's going to trend downwards because it's just, to me, it's just way too long for a playoff game with a side as competitive as the Kings. They've been, and this is the other thing. I've been seeing like Oilers fans saying like, yeah, we own the Kings and all this and that. But from a game by game basis, the way the series has been going, you would have been doing good at these prices betting the Kings. So, um, and I don't necessarily think the Kings are that much worse this year, which I know has kind of been my overarching point this year. They've had like a longer lull and been a little out of form, but I don't necessarily think that when you think about like the potential of the roster, it's, if anything, just should be better this season than it has been. So I kind of like the Kings. I think they're gonna make this pretty competitive early in the season or early in the series. I'm going to be looking to bet them for sure.
Yeah, the Kings had their struggles, obviously at times this year, and I think when you look at the makeup of the roster, it's certainly a playoff looking forward group when you talk about, their depth down the middle and all that. And I feel like this could be one of those things where they're either tied with Edmonton going to game 5 or have a series lead or something like that. And we're all saying, oh, why didn't we see that? They match up down the middle with Edmonton, like it could be, of course, they have Kopitar, Danault, Dubois. I could certainly close my eyes and see that happening. I would say for game 1 here, I want to bet the over on 5.5. I just think the goaltending is too volatile. I can't really. I know Skinner was fine, but it's just like I still don't really trust it. And I think that especially too, if Edmonton's trailing, you like that over as well with the way that they can push. So I mean, you look at a lot of these games, kind of a bonus pick here. If you can see it on anywhere, I'm going to be betting the Grand Salami here. Maybe on Sunday or if usually day by day, if someone offers it for all game 1s, I'll certainly bet the Grand Salami over. But I think we're going to see more goals than people think here, because I can't remember a year with more goaltending question marks.
Okay, let's wrap up the series with the Knights and Stars. Dallas is minus 140, Golden Knights plus 120. Some books have it a little tighter than that. The way I'd like this is if you're interested in the Stars to win the Stanley Cup and you haven't bet them yet, or you want to add to it, and there's obviously legitimate upside to Dallas winning the Stanley Cup, there's pretty decent chance that they struggle with the Knights. This is a really good team. So if Dallas goes behind 1-0, 2-1, 3-2, I think you're going to get a good opportunity to get a decent number on Dallas to win the series. Or like me, I think I'm going to wait to see if they fall behind and bet them to win the Stanley Cup. Otherwise, man, this is a coin flip. I think it's really tough to gauge just where the ceiling is on Vegas, and we know Dallas is great, but boy, what a tough draw for the number 1 team in the conference, Nick.
Yeah, it really sucks. It's going to be an unreal series, but I was obviously happier with our Stars futures before. But I mean, everyone's going to be a tough out west, so it is what it is. And the Knights really have been out of form. I think they're the ultimate question mark here. How much do you want to credit what they did last year? They're going to have their guys back in the lineup. We know Stone's going to play. So for me, I still lean with the Stars in game 1. I lean with them on the series, but I don't think it's like a bet you need to lock in. There's enough bets out there on all these series. I'd rather take like my chances on the Stars to win the cup still, or take my chances on some Stars to win the Conn Smythe than to bet this one, because I think you still just have to give enough respect to the Knights. So, and I know Tim's going to give this out, I think there's a bit of a lean with the Stars at -125, but I don't think it's like the most exciting bet. And that the Knights are a little hard to predict. But I do feel like Dallas really is just such a well-built team right now. If they get goaltending, like there's just really nothing that suggests they can't go all the way. 3 really good forward lines. The back end's been excellent. Chris Tanev's actually picked up his level a little bit since getting to Dallas. So there really just isn't many flaws on the roster. I still really like what they have going on. And Ettinger's been better recently. So I think he's only as much of a question mark as anyone else. And the other thing that's going to be interesting is to see what the Knights do in goal here. And I wish we had some confirmation towards that, because I think it's possible that we don't see Aiden Hill. He had another really shaky game last night versus the Ducks. And he has not been good. Logan Thompson's been way better recently. But with that said, you can always, I mean, it's obvious to say why they should lean towards Hill based off last postseason. So I'm interested to see where they end up going for the game 1 start.
Yeah, it's since moved. I locked in Vegas at -125 last night after the games, and I still like, there's 130s out there. I still like that. Or, excuse me, Dallas. Sorry. I locked Dallas in last night, and I think really, Nick, Vegas is, we keep kind of waiting for it. I think a lot of what is being priced into them is and being labeled into them is just like what they can be. And I think we really, since the deadline, only got that glimpse of the ceiling when they went on that road trip and, had a great 4 or 5 game stretch. And then since then, like it's just really concerning to me. Pietrangelo has been banged up, sick. Like, I just think this Dallas team is humming right now. I have a lot of confidence in their forward depth. They have a huge edge in net. It's that even if you want to do the defense matchup, I don't think it's. I know Vegas has a lot of names, but Noah Hannafin isn't like Bobby Orr. Like I think a lot of I think a lot of their price is just their name. And this Dallas team, I think for some reason still continues to get slept on when we talk about some of the big guns. So if I didn't get in on Dallas as the Stanley Cup future, Nick, when you were talking about it a month or 2 ago. So I'm going to be betting them series by series here, and I'm going to start with the -130 on this series. I think there's too many question marks for Vegas. If you're betting them, it seems more like you're a hope than it is, what we've actually seen. You're betting it from, I think, that road trip when they looked right, and that to me is not enough.
I feel like you're selling. I think that shows why it's like you can see both sides of it so well, though, because I don't necessarily like their decor is still absolutely stacked. You don't know there's a huge goaltending edge. They have the goalie who had like a historically good run is still there, so it feels like they're a little out of sorts. And I'm like, my thing is, I just think the Stars deserve to be that much of a favorite almost over anyone. It's also crazy to look at this. Vegas is the 9th cup favorite. They play the 3rd cup favorite in round 1. So there's still some serious mark of respect over that Knights roster, which is obviously very stacked when everyone's healthy. But who knows what to expect out of the gates here. And I think I think just because you got the -125, it's a great play, but that's also probably why you wouldn't want to go too long when there's a bit of a guessing game going on with what we're going to see out of Vegas.
Yeah, and I'll add too, I think it's difficult with how much they, turned over their roster from the deadline. I mean, like even the Stone thing, it's like, oh, what an advantage, they're going to get Mark Stone out of nowhere here. It's like, he still hasn't played with this like newish group. I just think it's, in Dallas, they did the Tanev deal early, and they called up what's his face, Nick, from the AHL, Stankoven. Like they kind of did their thing early, and I feel better about that.
Yeah, and the thing to like about the Stars in terms of the long-term futures, I think, and I mean, this just shows how good they are because they still have such a good first line too, but they can take a few more injuries, I think, than most teams, and guys are going to get dinged up when we get into this thing. So I think that's an argument in their favor for sure. But I mean, obviously, I guess you got to say the same thing about the Knights. They've been playing without like 6 regulars the entire season. So, um,
Yep.
yeah, this it's pretty crazy. This is the series for sure.
All right, so that's all 4 series. Let's go into the Conn Smythe out west. We gave out our Eastern Conference ones on the Eastern preview, obviously. So let's round it out. A lot more, I think, interesting prices in the Western Conference than the East. I'm gonna get it started. This is one that Nick and I are both on, or both would endorse. Actually, 2 of these. So we'll start with these 2, and they're very obvious. They're very straightforward. That's Connor Hellebuck. He's 35-1 for the Jets. If you think the Jets have a chance to win the Stanley Cup and you want to back them, back Connor Hellebuck to win the Conn Smythe, because he's 35-1. The Jets are 20-1 to win the Stanley Cup. If you, this is it, I guess you can say it's a little bit of a dangerous game to play, but in this situation, I almost think it's so correlated. It's almost more correlated than anything I can imagine, because the way that first of all, the way the Jets are built, like there's no superstar Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, etc. on this team that's gonna light it up on the score sheet. And even if they do, like let's say the Jets win the first round and Mark Scheifele has 12 points in that series and it's just like lights out, and you're like, oh man, like I need to get in on Mark Scheifele. I think you're still going to be able to get like a really good price on him after round 1. And that's still, even if Mark Scheifele does that, still think Hellebuck would win the Conn Smythe. As the goalie, it's Connor Hellebuck, right? It's so that, and Demko to a lesser extent for the Canucks. I think you can make the same argument here, Nick. So those are 2 I wanted to start with. Anything to add on those guys, and a few more you like?
Yeah, I like them both. The Hellebuck one is definitely the most correlated one on the board. I think it's really hard to see them winning without him being the guy. But I also still think Demko. I know Quinn Hughes was probably their season MVP. I shouldn't even say probably. He was their season MVP, given even with how good Demko was. But I think the playoffs, and you look at the way that Canucks played down the stretch, the way they're going to want to win in the playoffs and need to win is lower scoring games. And I still think Demko was rightfully the second best goalie in the league this year. So I like that. I feel like the Canucks take your chance there. And the Canucks, I think, are less of a fraud than people think. So I do want to get the Demko in there. And then the other one that I had, we gave it out last year and it got super short. At one point, looked like it was going to have a good chance to win. I like Rope Hintz. I know that Dallas has a lot of guys that could do this. You could do, I mean, that's the thing. There's a case for, I don't think it'll be Robertson. I know he produced the most this year, but I still think when the games get meaningful and people notice what Hintz does down the middle, that makes me like him over Robertson. And Ettinger, obviously, it could be him. Heiskanen's in the mix. So you do have more of a contended battle, but I think it's a fun sprinkle with how much I like the Stars' chances to go on a run here. So that makes me like Hintz, even though I know that the Stars kind of have a crowded field. He was so good in the playoffs last year. He was so good versus Calgary the year before. Like he's just proven to be a playoff performer that makes a difference. And it feels like every year we hear the same thing. Like once people watch him, they're like, holy crap, this guy is ridiculous. Like he's just everywhere. He's such a good player. And it feels like it kind of gets slept on until like you really get into the games. And then people see differences he makes all over the ice. So give me Hintz. I think if the Stars go on a run, he's going to need to be a dominant force down the middle. And I think he can do that. So I like Rope.
Over a point per game in last year's playoffs, Hintz. I think that's a great play. And you look at I think to me, Nick, the roster, I actually don't think it's as challenging because I feel like Hintz to me sticks out the most. Like I know that doesn't make sense, but it'd be like, to me, it's Ottinger or Hintz. I don't know if it's going to be like that. That's their path, in my opinion. They don't have they don't have like a Matthews, a Pasternak, one of those guys. And I think the closest thing to it for them is Hintz, and especially his track record in the playoffs. So I would fully endorse that, especially if you're someone that feels like they missed the boat on some of the Dallas stuff or Cup futures earlier on. I think Hintz is a great play.
Yeah, and I don't hate from that same vein. I don't mind the smaller play on Heiskanen too. I think he's like 65-1. Definitely afford to take the Hintz and Heiskanen and hope one of them is the guy, and the Dallas gets on a run.
Yeah.
Okay. a couple more just to throw out there. Jack Eichel at 45-1. I think is interesting if the Knights get it together. I do think he's going to be the engine for them. And I like Roman Josi at 100. We talked a little bit about some of the defensemen that could win this for other teams. You know, we talked about Brent Burns, and I think that if Nashville goes and makes this run, and as Nick said, like they absolutely could. I really think that if you want to have some fun with like a long shot bet in the playoffs, and you're scared to bet the Capitals, just bet the Predators. I think that this is a team that is totally live to win against any of these teams in the Western Conference in a best of 7 and to roll. And I think that part of the reason they could do that is Roman Josi is such a beast. He's going to play, 27, 28 minutes a night. He's going to score a ton of points. He's going to, he'll just be all over. And he's a type of guy that everybody loves to talk about when they start watching Predators games. We saw it as they went on their crazy winning streak and people started paying attention to them. Like, oh, Josi is getting his way back into the Norris race. He's won a Norris. Like this guy is a legitimate superstar. And I think his number is this long because of obviously it's the fact that the Predators are a long shot to win the cup. But he at 100-1, any triple digit price on Josi, I think is absolutely worth a flyer here. Tim, you have any others you want to delve into?
Yeah, I have one that just is not consistent with the rest of the market. Mikko Rantanen on FanDuel is 90-1. I just locked it in as we were sitting here. Rantanen's been over a point per game in his playoff career. Look, is it going to be hard to beat out Makar and McKinnon? Absolutely. But as I said earlier with that Makar to lead that series in points pick, Rantanen has totally been a playoff guy. So he's kind of the Draisaitl to the McDavid here. And he very well could end up with the most points in Colorado winning it all. So I think 90-1, it's like 30s and 28s the rest of the way. So I'm going to lock in a little sprinkle on that.
Okay. Well, that'll do it for our Western Conference series previews. We talked about our game ones. We'll be back recording Sunday night to preview the Monday and Tuesday card, and then we'll be back. We'll be recording Tuesday night to do the Wednesday and Thursday card, etc. That's probably going to be our cadence here. We'll make sure to touch on every game possible as we get into the business end of the season here in the Stanley Cup playoffs. For Nick and Tim, thank you for listening. Thank you to our producers on the back end, and good luck everybody this weekend with all your bets. Please be sure to watch our Power Plays video on YouTube. We'll go into some best bets a little bit deeper into the weeds, game by game over the weekend. You can find that on YouTube, and it's presented by Bet365, so be sure to check that one out.